put it to the top. I think the first one we should do is the date and time one that we already did a preliminary review last week, and we had some feedback. So Tarek, do you want to walk us through what has actually changed since last time?
Yeah, can you go to the bottom of the issue? I pasted the diff. Yeah, here. Yeah, so here is the original proposal and the changes in the original proposals. So this is just the diff between the original proposal and addressing the feedback that we got last time. So of course, I mean, like as you see, the red line is what get removed, and green line is what get added. So should we go to one by one on the diff, or should we just give people some time to read the diff?
I think we can just walk over what has actually changed. So if you want to just quickly talk about the diffs, that's probably enough.
Yeah. Okay. So first one, we removed the constructor that it takes int as a day number, and we said that this would be confusing with the other constructors that start with int with year, so people can expect, like, you know, it should be consistent. So we removed the constructor and we added this factory method is from day number instead. Yeah. And next, we removed days in month because this is existing in date time also, so we don't need it here. Is leap year removed also? It's the same. It existed in the date time, so we removed it from here too. And we have removed the explicit and implicit operations, and we replaced those with a factory method. So right now we have to date time, which is take time of day, and to date time, which is take time of day and the kind, if people want to be explicit about the kind of the date times we are creating. And we have from date time, which is take date time itself. And we removed the static compare. Can you scroll down a little bit, please? Emo, can you scroll down a little bit?
I just did. Does it freeze again?
Apparently.
So how far? Like I scrolled basically down so that you can see all the parse methods. Does it not show up?
No, it's in my screen. It's freeze to what we had first time.
Yeah, the bottom of my screen are the compare to methods.
All right, let me try to share again. I don't know why Teams does that. I have no idea. No, it won't even share anymore. Like if I click on share, I just get the donut and the tray, but like nothing happens. It's 49036. 49036.
I had just told you, for what it's worth, your YouTube stream is frozen. So I think it was your network reset.
Well, it is what it is. I mean, outside this morning I saw a truck from Xfinity. Maybe that was why. Internet. All right. So where were we? We were at the compare methods, right?
I think that's all for the date and for the time of day. So we removed the meridian enum, and we have removed all constructors that it takes this meridian. Also, we have removed the is this clear, guys, or I'm fast, or should I slow? Or
it makes sense. I'm just trying to page in what we said last time and try to diff between what you have and what I have and make sure it's the same thing. It just takes a while. but it makes sense.
Okay. Yeah, it's between. Go ahead, Remo.
Tarek, it's Matt. So I think the reason for removing, correct me if I'm wrong, but the reason for removing add milliseconds and add ticks was that we said if you're working with time of day only, you're likely only be doing these operations with things.
Okay. And for the operators, plus operator, minus operators, we removed those. And also we removed the implicit and explicit operators for the sake of using a factory method instead, as we did in the date only. So right now we removed almost all operators, the plus, minus, and the explicit and implicit conversions. And we added from time span, which is take time span, and we added from date time, which is take date time. Also, we have removed the static compare.
So just to recap, so I think Matt suggested that we remove the add seconds and add milliseconds. That's correct?
Yeah, add milliseconds already removed here, and yeah, and we will remove add seconds also.
Oh, yeah, and add ticks you already removed as well, right? Yep.
Yes, that's right.
So that means that we only have hours and minutes left to daytime. That's right, because you don't have the time portion to it.
Right, because we could reflexively add it on both types, where each one takes the other one as an argument, but you know.
Yeah, that seems weird.
Less is more, so.
I agree. I mean, it also conceptually doesn't make sense. So I think the only thing really missing is then the 2 time span, right?
Would that be the same as subtracting?
Pass one of these to a SQL parameter at the moment. Like until we adjust those things, we'll also need a way to get over to a time span. I mean, yeah, you could subtract, but that's not intuitive, in my opinion.
I think you really have to say time span dot from ticks or something and then pass in the ticks. I don't know how else you would do it.
Well, we left the time of day minus time of day. We got rid of time of day minus time span.
You're right. I see that now. Sorry.
Yeah.
Oh, I see. Yeah, well, if that is intuitive, I don't think we will discover that.
To get like date time, which has time only. So if they are going to use this type, they will need to convert it to do the interop to date time. But I'm not sure about like if this is really needed scenario or not so far. I can think about people doing that today, but
I mean, should we have a plus operator that takes a date only, takes a time of?
no.
Should there be any, or did we conclude that we don't need any?
I think we don't need any so far. And in the future, I mean, like if we get any case that it needs to do something there, I mean, we can consider it. But
Right.
but I think this proposal is good enough. I mean, for the scenarios we need to support.
It is the only thing that I
Drive what things people actually want to do is a good way to go. We don't need to preemptively make all the places that would want to touch this exist.
sure.
Yeah.
Sorry, can I interject? Is there someone who's looking at what we're supposed to be seeing? Could they share their screen?
I guess I'll do what I typically do in this, and
Cool. So like in terms of names, we are still cool with date only and time of day, right?
Yeah, I think this is the best option we have. So Chinese calendars or whatever.
Yeah, I had the same reaction.
Yeah.
I'm also not sure that it makes it clearer. to me, date only kind of makes it clear, like it's only a date and nothing else.
That's right.
And then for, as I said last time, like I personally would prefer time only, but I can live with time of day as well, because at least it describes what it is.
This was the purpose about like we have to get something start with word time and word date for these types.
Yeah, having gone through all of this naming argument on multiple different proposals in other languages, really without a grouped namespace for all the date and time types to belong together, you have to rely. There was one bit of feedback in the GitHub issue that I don't think we talked about or addressed in GitHub, which was asking if the add hours and minutes methods really should be doubles, or if they should be ints, or if there should be like an add that takes hours and minutes that's ints. I don't have any opinion, but I just wanted to mention it.
How they will do that?
New time span.
Yeah, I mean, yeah,
and
I
then
mean,
figure out what the constructor on that does.
Yeah, everything can be done, I mean, in longer way, but we are providing the APIs also to be convenient to users.
To me, the like thinking about it in terms of the add hours and add minutes are just, but I leave that up to Tanner.
It's going to end up using double anyways, because that's what you have to use internally for a lot of the operations. It's why date time does it internally, because it's simplest to just process everything as a double.
Then API approved. Let me actually remove the blocking one now as well. And comment. All right. Cool. That was easy. Matt, it only took you what, 5 years to get to this point?
I'm really excited and thank you all very much.
Sure. I'll present it. In the description, I didn't change what we have in the issue description, but I put the API proposal in a comment. So if you mind searching in the page for background on motivation, you'll find the comment. The word kind of more usable, and this issue is aiming to make use of source-generated code to help users have better usability with, and also have like more maintainable code and everything. So the person who did the prototype is also in the meeting today, Martin, and yes. Okay.
It's called the Rube Goldberg machine.
Well, so I'll assume, so basically if anyone is interested in the issue page, there is this comment that has a list of samples as well, and over there you'll see logging sample of this issue. Basically when you scroll through the comments is that the main focus is on usability and enforcing strong type logging. And it would be great for users to come up with a specific logging only templates. And what I was hoping to...
I mean, the stream will see whatever the stream sees, but given that YouTube seems to be dead anyway, it is what it is. So just share your screen via Teams.
Okay, I'll do that. Okay. Okay, so here it is. If you guys see the screen, let me know.
Looks good. Content.
Example of how we use logger message define. You define this action, and then basically a bunch of a main key advantage is that we don't have to parse messages on every single to find templates to substitute. And now going to a new proposed approach, static, being able to have instance method as well as static methods, and for logging. And this, in terms of usability, it helps a lot, not having users to define, having to write these kinds of actions for each logging method, but rather defining their logging methods. And advantages can also have string names. So there's an optional classes that would be like hello, some like type, and then we could auto-generate type serialization behind the scenes as well. And that would
Mary,
go.
can you, I have several questions, but could you share what the generated code for one of these looks like?
Yeah, the generated code is actually up top here. So for something like this, this is what the generated code would look like.
Okay, so I want to mention something, and I don't know if it's completely relevant or only partially relevant, but for C#10, there's a 95% chance that C#10 will include improved support for interpolated strings, where someone can write a custom builder. And as part of that pattern, I know one of the key things as part of this generated code is guarding the interpolation such that it doesn't happen unless logging is enabled. And the pattern from the compiler enables that. So you can write, you could write your log message that took an interpolated string and have it not evaluated at all unless that particular log level was enabled. I worry a little bit that the difference between what that enables and what this is proposing is relatively small.
So if I can jump in and answer that question, Stephen?
Yeah, go ahead.
We don't actually use interpolated string. It's sort of, if you go back and look at the usage example, it looks a bit like interpolated strings, but we're actually using message templates.
Yes.
And then we're passing like params to it. So we aren't interpolating because we actually want
required to format that into a string if it doesn't want to.
So can I chime in? So
sure.
So the implementation that we have right now hides the string formatting process within the generated code and is designed to, and in fact leverages interpolation internally. So it turns what is not suitable for an interpolation model into something that is that uses interpolation. So automatically when this gets compiled with C#10, it's efficient. All right, so if you look at the generated code, the example generated code, there's a formatting function in there somewhere. Where are we here? Yeah, so the function above the.
Yeah, go ahead. Here.
So stop moving for a second. There you go. So that generated function here uses interpolated strings internally.
So that 1, 2, 3, that third parameter is passing an interpolated string as a builder. When you say it uses interpolated strings, you mean like the existing kind or the new kind?
The C# kind. Look at, there's no line number. There's a line.
I understand, but the C# kind is changing. Is my point.
Okay. This is generated. Hold on.
Go ahead.
This is generated code. It is generating C# syntax for an interpolated string. The implementation of that interpolated string can use the new model that the C#10 compiler is going to support.
Understood. I'm saying that the C# model for C#10 is extensible. So it does, an interpolated string no longer has to just create a string. It can create anything with a builder pattern, is my point.
Yeah,
so,
I think that makes sense. I don't know if it affects this though. Maybe it affects the code gen itself, but I don't know if it affects the end-to-end. We still need calls to log to get the actual. Yeah.
Yes, but the call to log itself, if we're talking about, we want this to be a one-liner, we're talking about writing an attribute versus an expression-bodied method that calls log with the relevant arguments.
So there's an opportunity over to the other side where it gets processed. We can completely eliminate boxing and any allocations at this entire code path, but it requires the code generator to do this.
I understand. Let me suggest that before we say yes, this is blessed, let's go ahead and do it. I'd appreciate it if someone would sync up with Fred on the C# team to work out what a solution like this would look like.
And the calls into the logger itself, like I think that is kind of like the thing to figure out, right? Because
and the essence here is specifically in an ideal case, you don't produce a string for this stuff.
Right.
The ideal case
Understood.
is name value pairs are delivered in a structured fashion to the logger.
I understand. I want to make sure we're not basing it on what you can do in C#9 today.
Right.
Stephen, your ask is noted. Mariam and I will follow up on that.
Great.
Right.
Thank you.
I still think we should review the API just because the attributes, I think, would still have to exist anyway, because we need that other information regardless, unless it also supports
It's possible.
passing in
Maybe
arbitrary.
again, what I
Example, let's say if it was like log information and then we didn't, if in terms of, I'm going to ignore like for a second, like park that topic that we talked about, but given that if we assume that you're going to use this logger message attribute, one thing I wanted to like showcase was like how the API would have looked like, and also there's also a bunch of other things as well. So like in terms of the code, the generated code itself exposes some APIs that I was like, not only was I going to aim to like propose this, but also those types that show up in the generated code. And on top of that, some of the generated error messages that kind of I had a gist of.
Change, we do it again. We reviewed datetime like 4 times. What?
Well, I mean, it depends on like how you see this, right? Like my understanding is that there is an ask to just reconcile the design with C# interpolated strings. Like if the feature crew genuinely feels that this will have no impact on the design, I'm okay with doing that. If you feel the design,
It works on .NET Framework 4.6 for that matter.
Yeah, my concern isn't the attribute. It's once we start talking about all the things that are required for the builder to call into in order to make this work, and that's what I'm afraid is going to change as a result of the discussion with Fred.
There are literally 2 public types. There's the attribute, and there's the struct that stores the actual values.
okay, since you're now talking, it says here's how I want it to show up in the log.
Right.
Exactly.
And then magic happens and you somehow generate this method, right?
Right. The body.
Right.
And
How does it know where to get the logger from?
It's an argument. It should be, so the logger should actually be passed in as the first argument to the method.
It says don't have fields with underscore names.
There's a options to the generator to tell it what's the name of the field to consume.
I mean, honestly, like I think if you make it by convention, you say you take, if there's a single field of type iLogger, I take it. I think that's probably not unreasonable. Doing it by name seems, as Fowler said, janky because
instead. And then as soon as somebody started to use it, they asked for the first form.
Right.
All right. So people like the benefit here is as the author of a component, I can have a class that says this is the stuff that I support to be logged. Period. Right. You can't just pass an iLogger and call log information on it. That doesn't work. I can now audit all my logging statements in one place, see their levels, see their strings are consistent.
Yep.
And so, fine. They wanted this, so I brought it back, and and it's up to the user to do it in either form.
Right.
How do I pass the parameter to the source gen? You said it was the name is a parameter.
So
within, base class or interface or project level configuration.
Totally reasonable.
Would it work if my logger field was on a base class that I defined? Like, does it have to be a field on this class?
Well, so right now it's the current implementation looks for a symbol called _logger. Doesn't matter where in the hierarchy it comes from, it needs to be visible to the code. If we add an attribute, then it could get it from a property and I think that'd be fine, right?
Another one. So logging methods must be partial. Logging methods cannot have a body. Cannot be generic. This is another example. If someone wrote this down. And also, like they also must have to pass a parameter to the logging method. This one also would throw an error. And in total, there's like 18 of them.
Yeah, I think that might be a level of detail.
Because I know like otherwise they're like based on category, like 1000 is like code style. I forget how it's done in the BCL, right?
Well, I think
what number are we talking about? Is this event ID?
No, he's talking about the error messages, the actual diagnostics that are raised by the generator. So I think the one I don't know exactly how we do this, but we one or two files that we share, as widely as possible, and it doesn't. To me, honestly, I don't care about the ranges. I mean, if there are ranges right now, so be it. But like, we should just make sure that we have unique IDs, and then just make sure we reduce overlap, if that makes sense. So I'm not. Basically, what I'm trying to say is I'm not very supportive of each individual feature team on our end introducing their own prefix, because that will just result in.
And note, there's no constraint on these are arbitrary strings. The prefix could be much longer.
It could be. We talked about that too. So the problem practically that you have with that is that the error numbers are showing up in the IDE in the error list. So if it's longer than, let's say, 20 characters, it will always be clipped, right? And so if you have a prefix like Microsoft.extensions.logging, people only see Microsoft X, right? And then
MEL or CA or like RS. Like Stephen, you mentioned there's the ones that we use for obsolescence. Which ones are they?
I'd have to find. There's a file somewhere in .NET Runtime. I think the prefix we used is sys, SYS. I could be wrong. Maybe it's LIB. I don't remember. But there's a file that kind of lists out the
Revit. Like somebody already claimed the next 4 numbers, and then yours is the one down. Like, I would honestly not care about the numbers at all. Like, realistically, what matters is that the number is unique. I can copy and paste it into Bing or Google and get a unique hit. And whether it's consecutive or organized or divided by tens or hundreds, I don't think anybody really cares.
Optional. So if you don't supply it, the code generator is going to produce automatically a format that'll produce all of your parameters as JSON encoded text. So we've had several places where that kind of functionality is desirable. In addition,
log level being dynamically provided, and one where you don't have the string message, but you pass down the the key 1 and key 2, and then the result you get is a JSON serialized log message. And the APIs are here, so string message here. And event ID. Event ID, by the way, needs to be unique. And
unique within what?
Yeah.
Because so that could be changed.
Yeah, we changed that.
The original proposal mentioned deriving event IDs from event names. If I look at Lou's original thing, is that still a thing that we're considering?
So right now it's deriving. It derives the event name from your method name. It doesn't do any magic on the IDE.
So is there any risk? So how is it deriving it? Is it like a hash?
No, so event name equals method name.
Sorry. So that's how you get the event name. But does the event ID
mentally mess up, right? And
that's fair.
I think it's probably it's also, if you can write down a rule that basically says must be unique within an assembly, very easy to understand. If you say something like within the scope of your logger, which there's 1,200 different ways you can define that scope, not so easy to explain, right? And then people will definitely screw up.
Yeah, especially if you start using base classes and inheriting from multiple places, that would get confusing quick.
Yes, I think that's probably fair.
I don't think it can be unique within.
To want to use 0 through whatever for their initial logs for each category, because programmers tend to be a little OCD, right? So, yeah, why enforce that there are gaps in if there are multiple categories? Are you advocating
against warning?
Yes. Warn if it's in the same class, or fail even if it's in the same class. But yeah, warning just for being in the same assembly is a bit much in my opinion.
Yeah, I'm not advocating for the scope. I'm just saying pick a rule that you can easily explain, right? I'm not an expert in that field.
IDs, when you're having these different log categories, means that somebody needs to have in their head some global numbering scheme to make sure this class doesn't overlap with this class, which kind of sucks. So if I say that all IDs are globally unique across the entire assembly, then I'm forcing somebody to have that discipline to keep them unique. If instead we enforce it on a class, so all the logging methods declared in one class or base class thereof, those need to be unique. Then you have local reasoning at least.
Right. I mean, have you
if the partial method pattern works for both, having it on a class that implements some interface, that actually seems like a good balance between the two patterns.
And you can still expose the logger if you want to, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's nice.
I mean, your generator could enforce that. Right? Generator could say if somebody defined extension methods over that particular ilogger of t, you could warn when somebody calls the unrelated ones. But yeah.
It's looking in the source, in our large source base that we use within our product here. Several log messages we're using log information, log debug, log warning, log error, and in the message string itself, we're passing warning : error : that kind of stuff,
right?
Redundantly. Similarly, they're passing datetime.now as a parameter, and even though it's captured by the logger under the covers. So the source generator flags these things explicitly. He says, hey, you probably don't need info : in your message string. Hey,
Nice.
You probably don't want to pass datetime because the infrastructure will supply it for you.
That's good.
It doesn't need to be mentioned in the message text.
Right. The other thing that I think we should talk about, I guess, if time isn't run out yet, is the struct that we actually want to expose.
That's it. So in terms of instantiated types, you might have, if you have 20 log methods, you might end up with 19 different structs being generated, depending on your parameter combination.
Can we use value tuple here?
So
somebody suggested that. I tried to understand how that would work, and I couldn't figure out how to make it fit. Existing logger message define is limited to 6 arguments. With this model, you're limited to 6 arguments with no boxing, and then the rest is passed as a params array. So it's an unbounded number of logging parameters.
And today, the internal types that we have so we have 6 different logger message.define APIs, and from T1 to T6, and like theoretically, like whatever, maybe just a little quickly is in case in the future someone wanted to have a strongly typed serialization with different prototypes, then if we can easily like have it as an add-on to the source generator, so that a lot of the code doesn't need to be written by the developer. So it could be like a future add-on to this.
Right. So the one thing I want to mention, because I just see it on my screen here, is you have this Microsoft Extensions logging internal namespace where you have an argument formatter that you say you will be using it by the generated code. I would...
Yeah, so that's already applied, and then we thought putting it in an internal namespace further reinforces that.
Yeah, so the problem with internal, like, because the queue cuts both ways, right? Like, so the problem is whatever we ship, we have to support. Right, and so the question now becomes, if we put it in internal, that kind of seems to indicate for us, oh, this is stuff we can still change, when in practice we can't, right? So I'm totally fine with saying put it in a different namespace to make it less discoverable, right? Or make it, use a more ugly name or apply editor browsable. That's all fine, but as Jeremy said, like, don't invent new namespaces that you specifically use for internal stuff, because it's not internal, right? There's no such thing as internal. So that's the only feedback. So I think the general idea you have is sound. It's just don't use that.
All right. So what I have on my list so far is we need to nail down the uniqueness scope for the event IDs, improve the field selection algorithm for the instance mode, consider using value tuples, changing the namespace for these internal types.
And then we can prove it as is, I guess. All right, so then let me post a comment.
No, it's not really approved as is, because whatever the namespace, if we come up with a new namespace, we probably want to talk about that and think about it.
Sorry, I meant
Make
like
sure that
once you come back with the design.
As part of the package generator package produced, right?
No,
We
this
want it
as
in the
opposed to
core.
having it generated.
Yeah.
Oh, that course. Okay.
Yeah, I mean,
We
there's
should opt for minimizing the generated code.
yes. I was about to say that.
It's a serviceable burden. It's a complexity cost to the customer. And then when you have multiple instances, I just think that one applies here.
But I wonder, so aren't we generating custom types for all the closures, await statements, yield statements, and so forth?
We do.
Yeah, but it's terrible.
But like yeah, there's two reasons for this. One, because it's the only mechanism we have. It's not something that we like. It's just what we have to do. And then I think the other question is also
How it works, because the code gen for the body is actually different too.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Yeah, it's state and code, not just state. I think that's the main difference.
Okay.
I mean, the nice thing is, as Eric said, right, both the generator as well as the library are out of band already. So like you can totally add new.
But yeah.
Okay, so if you want, if the generator gets smarter and wants to use a different type, the old ones would still need to be there, and we just start calling a different type instead.
Right.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah. Already generated code has to keep working. No breaking changes on the support types, but newly generated code can do whatever it wants.
We could follow the obsolescence patterns of this, because he has some concerns around the DLL import generator and its use of Marshall, and that, like, I think there does need to be some affordance there for generated code being that does use obsolete methods and having those diagnostics be raised. So,
okay. I mean, to a certain extent, the generator controls that, right? Because you can suppress message whatever you want, right? So it depends on what file you're generating. But I think the bigger problem is the generator itself. You know, I think the idea is if you have a companion type and you change the generator to use that companion type, and then you say, okay, that companion type doesn't work for me. You introduce a new companion type, change your generator to use the new one. Basically, people that already built an assembly, they already have it built and it just runs at this point. It's just a binary, right? As soon as they upgrade your package to the new version, well, the generator will now also use the new type, right? So so that means people that rebuild will never get an obsolescence warning, because once they rebuild, they also use the new version of the generator anyway, right? So it's more about people that have existing binaries. So in that sense, like if your generation changes, people just have to rebuild. That's pretty much all. All right.
Time, so a decade ago, if you wanted to use a type as the return type of an async method, you would attribute that return type with the builder for that return type that the compiler should use. So for example, value task has on it an attribute async method builder attribute that specifies async value task method builder.
Mm-hmm.
And then the compiler will allow you to substitute a different builder. To do that, though, you need to be able to sort of override the one that's specified on the return type and specify a different one. And that will be done via an attribute. So the idea is we introduce an advanced, very advanced, this is a 1% of users thing, but that includes some of our own code. And async method, the problem today is people end up writing their own return types just to be able to control that kind of thing. So they write my custom task just so that they can control the builder. And we don't want to see a proliferation of return types just for the purposes of controlling that stuff. So now someone could write their own builder for a value task that adds logging, or I've seen someone do it that goes back to, forces going back to the UI thread on every completion, things like that. Custom builders, one for value task and one for value task of T, that does that pooling. And then someone can opt in by slapping this attribute on their method, naming that builder type, and the compiler will bind to the new version instead.
So basically the way I understand is now this override attribute, basically if you apply it to a method, it controls what the compiler generates when you await this to the builder that the compiler generates for the method. It has nothing to do with. So I guess when I have local functions that return value task of t as well, then that also controls those, right? It's basically like everything in the scope and below, right?
Everything in the scope and below, yes. So that the attribute can also be applied to, for example, a class, which means every async method in this class. So the first part is just the attribute that allows someone to specify a different builder. And then the second part of this are pooling builders for value task and value task of t, which look exactly like async value task method builder, except a pooling prefix on the names.
Okay. I know that you at one point were considering
to those fields. You could enable your builder to basically store your object into those fields and get the object from those fields rather than going to a global pool. I have not included that in these types today. The compiler's design is such that we can do it in the future by adding, where the builder has a static create method, and that static create method returns the same builder type on which it is defined. We are allowing that to now vary. So you can have a builder that all it has is a create method that does some logic in its create method and then returns a different builder type. So for example, if we wanted to allow some configuration on these pooling builders, for example, to control the size of the pool functionality, we could figure out some way to make it work.
Okay, thanks.
One question I have is for the override attribute, like what does it mean to apply to a constructor, event, or property?
Nested local functions.
But in a constructor, you still can't
changing. It's inheriting the attribute on the local from the constructor attribute.
Right.
Yeah. So it's just every nesting level.
Yeah. That said, the majority case I think is going to be it's on a method or it's on the module, and I kind of doubt we're going to see much of anything else.
All right. Does anybody have more questions or concerns?
Yeah, I know I talked offline with Steve about where the word pooling should go in the other two types, and I personally liked it as the prefix instead of trying to align the front half of the names, especially because these are, I said 5 people, Steve says 1%. He's obviously inflating his numbers.
Arguments and kind of feed them through, and then the builder would, know how to use that state to do something, which would probably then require us augmenting our pooling implementation to accept rent and return delegates, something like that. But it's not pretty.
Could we?
One day it will just work.
Sharing, awesome. So. There is a scenario that the Orleans team has, and there's a link in this to some discussion. But basically, they want to be able to serialize exception instances across the wire with decent fidelity, and they don't want to use binary form throughout our runtime and libraries. So one of the JSON, and then say, oh, let me set the inner exception, or let me set the stack trace string for you. That method right here as you're reading the JSON string from the payload. There is a little bit of discussion that I have on this, mainly like, hey, if you're calling set stack trace string, we're not going to set things like the method base property hanging off of exception. Like we can't turn it back into a method info. We don't know how to do that. The string is just opaque to us. And it should be opaque to whoever reads the exception object as well. There were also some alternative designs well documented on Stack Overflow. So because that hasn't historically been a problem, I don't see that this would make it any more of a problem. What are you thinking of?
Mostly just that we might start to see exceptions showing up that make no sense. And again, it's not a real concern. I just wanted to talk it through. That people start just storing arbitrary blobs in exceptions, and now we get stack traces submitted or crash dumps or whatever, and the exceptions are just gobbledygook.
Sure. So one thing that would guard against that, if the exception has ever been thrown, you can't change a stack trace. The stack trace is captured at the time that it's thrown. This would only in order to figure out where the crash actually happened. And per the discussion here, we intentionally don't touch that bucket. So we're at least not messing with Watson data. We're just not populating it.
Yeah, so my other question, similar to what Stephen was asking, is so stack trace is you pass it as a string, which basically means we don't parse it, right? We just basically put it into the whatever the field in the exception is that stores that. But like what happens now when I say things like, stack trace from exception and pass in the exception, like we can't, of course, reverse engineer the data that was in them, right? Is that a problem? Are there other things that, follow the cliff?
That's not something you were able to do anyway. If you call set current stack trace, I believe trying to pass
thrown, but the stack trace that was used to populate it was just a string. So there's no way to get a structured stack trace out of that exception, right?
Correct, and that is intentional.
Yeah, so all I'm asking is now, like, if somebody does it in the infrastructure somewhere, are there cases like this, stack trace dot, whatever, new stack trace from exception where things wouldn't work, where basically, maybe I don't understand, like, what does set current stack trace do then when you pass in an exception that has no stack trace? Where does the stack trace come from?
If you pass in an exception that has already been thrown, set current stack trace literally throws an exception itself, saying I can't mutate this exception that's already been thrown. The only scenario for it is you're literally fabricating an exception object by calling the constructor and then existing behavior. Now, with the existing method could set things like the Watson bucket if it wanted to. It doesn't, but it has the ability to set that information. And I mentioned that at the bottom of the thread here because Steve and I had a brief discussion on whether one method could be written in terms of the other. If you're taking an arbitrary string, instead of saying, please set this to be the current stack trace, then we could change set current stack trace to store the frame information because we obviously have it available to us.
Right.
We could never do such a thing with something that just takes a string as a parameter.
Yeah, so I was going to ask, does it make sense to have an overload that takes a system diagnostic stack trace?
Yeah.
We could. That's not that would be different as a whole as for though. You create and throw an exception, you capture it, and then you rethrow it from somewhere else.
Yeah, I'm just thinking through scenarios where you could end up having a stack trace instance, and you can call the toString yourself and pass it in. I'm just wondering if it would be useful to take in as an overload and then.
But it's a good question though. If we can find a scenario for it, we should absolutely add the overload.
Yeah, I care less about the scenario. I care more about the cliff thing that Stephen hinted at, is where have exceptions that don't work properly potentially, right? But if
when you do e.toString, it says the stack trace and it says hello emo.
Best effort, right? You basically, as you said, you take state from some other machine and you try to replicate it as best as you can to the point where it's at least convenient. And I think that's fair. I'm not concerned about fidelity. I'm more concerned about basically does the resulting system actually work, or does it blow up in spectacular fashions? Because the one we have is set current stack trace. I mean, maybe we should call it set string stack trace.
Or set remote stack trace or something. I don't really have a strong preference, honestly. If we had the word string in there, I'd probably want it at the end, not the middle. But
yeah, the only reason why I suggest the middle is because that mirrors the current API name. But it's an exception dispatch info, so who cares?
Yeah. If we wanted to put something in the middle to kind of act as a counterpart to current, then I would probably say remote. Because the scenario specifically is, I think at that point that would just be a doc issue. We would say, here's what you need to check in order to be successful calling this API. If you're a deserializer, you're going to be fine anyway, because you just hydrated the exception object. You clearly haven't thrown it yet.
People online?